Hello, everyone. Even with such technical difficulties, we are here. My name is Despina Aphrodite Milaki. I am the representative at the UN for the International Presentation Association, a network of Catholic religious congregations and friends who work in 24 countries worldwide for global justice. In this capacity and on behalf of our co-sponsors, I'm extremely pleased to welcome you all here today to our event. As the title indicates, this webinar aims to make the uncomfortable conversation comfortable, and our distinguished panelists will discuss the pathways of changing gender stereotypes, norms, and for bringing about transformative change. In this regard, we have the tremendous privilege of being joined today by 9 distinguished speakers that will share with us their thoughts and wisdom on this topic. I thank you all to generously offer your insights to our discussion today. Unfortunately, the time, we already lost 5 minutes, so the time we have at our disposal does not allow me to properly introduce each one of our speakers, as I would like to, by presenting the important elements from their professional background and respective positions they have been at. But for all of you who I'm sure are interested in learning more about them, please feel free to take a look at the brief bio. I just copy and paste the link in the chat box. So feel free to take a look at their brief bios. Before inviting our speakers to share their remarks, I would like to remind you that this session has a live interpretation, finally, available from English to Spanish and the other way around. And I will have to ask everyone to keep your microphones on mute so we can optimize our sound quality and experience for everyone gathered. I would also like to let you know that we are recording this session, and following our panelists' presentations, there will be a Q&A section. Hope you all enjoy our discussion. This is a unique opportunity for everyone to hear, to learn, to be inspired by experiences and knowledge shared by our prominent speakers. And now, without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you His Excellency, Ambassador Nuno Matthias. He's the Deputy Permanent Representative of Portugal to the UN. Mr. Ambassador, we're extremely privileged to have you here with us today and happy that you agreed to deliver your remarks, opening our discussion in this way. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Despina. I'm the one who's privileged to be able to join you. Let me start by a word of appreciation to the International Presentation Association for the invitation to participate in this event, which, of course, we fully endorse and support. You might have seen in the last yesterday how it was recognized by several speakers at the opening of the 65th CSW, how important, how women are still not yet equally represented in public life and in decision-making positions, both in public and the corporate sector. So we must ensure women's equal, full, and meaningful participation in all spheres of public life. Now, it's not only their right, but it's also the smart thing to do, when evidence shows that enhancing women's participation leads to more sustainable peace and development. Now, we all know that although women around the globe are at the helm of effective and inclusive COVID-19 response efforts, they are frequently underrepresented at the highest levels of decision-making and leaderships in sectors that are directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, including, among many, the health sector, and in political arenas at local, national, and international levels. Furthermore, we need to eliminate gender-based violence, particularly sexual and domestic violence, as well as gender oppressive practices that are human rights violations. These include ensuring the promotion and protection of sexual reproductive health and rights, which unfortunately are not yet fully recognized. Now, it goes without saying that men and boys are to be included in our effort to advancing gender equality. We need to promote long-term awareness, raising initiatives in education, engaging men and boys through the inclusion of curricula on gender equalities, on the empowerment of women and girls. We need to break this male stereotype and deconstruction these patriarchal norms at school and at home, contribute to building a more inclusive environment for women where they can exert their full potential to the best of their abilities. As it was described by the Secretary General, as it was described in the Secretary General's policy brief on the COVID-19 pandemic, has disproportionately impacted women who represent 70% of the health of social workers. Last year's celebration of the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, and the 20th anniversary of the Security Council Resolution 1325, represented opportunities to reaffirm and strengthen our efforts to address structural gender inequalities, the role of women in peace process, and the prevention of conflict-related sexual violence, domestic violence, and any other forms of gender-based violence. So we must ensure this accountability and fight against impunity, maintaining a zero-tolerance approach towards aggressors, and cooperating with civil society, youth, and women. The recent death of Sarah Everard has once more reminded all of us of the urgency of combating violence against women. As I conclude, allow me to recall that Portugal has ratified the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, more commonly known as the Istanbul Convention. We believe this is a benchmark legal instrument for the elimination of violence against women, an instrument that is open to all states. So I take this opportunity to continue to advocate that all those who have not yet done so go ahead and ratify it. It was a pleasure to join you, and I thank you for this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for this, for sharing those insights. I would only re-emphasize what you said, that ensuring equal participation of women in all spheres of public life, it's not only necessary, but it's the smart thing to do. So I'll keep that. Thank you very much again. Your points were very inspiring, and I'm sure many of us agree, not all of us, of course, all of us, I would say, but you know, they are all very well taken. And I wish you all the best, Portugal's presidency of the Council of the EU for the first semester of 2021. I would like to move now into introducing our first speaker of the day, Her Excellency Commissioner Karen Lucia Gomez Dampit of the Philippine Commission on Human Rights. She's also a member of the Philippine delegation to CSW 65. Your Excellency, thank you for joining our panel. It is a privilege that you are here today. You are one of the commissioners of the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, which is an independent national institution created under the 1987, if I'm not mistaken, Philippine Constitution, with a mandate to conduct investigations on human rights violations against marginalized and vulnerable groups, including women and girls. And you're also designated under your statutory law as gender ombud. In line with this designation, Your Excellency, your Center for Gender Equality and Women's Human Rights maintains a gender-based violence observatory, a monitoring and evaluation system and repository of data on gender-based violence. So I will ask you, what kind of national measures do you think could facilitate the transformation of discriminatory gender norms, which is crucial to eliminate gender-based violence? What are the factors that influence gender stereotyping?
Thank you very much, and good evening from Manila. In this brief intervention, allow me to share with you 3 points. First, some factors that continue to contribute to gender stereotyping in the Philippines. Second is possibilities for transforming discriminatory gender norms. And third, some gender equality related initiatives of the Commission as Gender Ombud under the Magna Carta of Women. The past years saw the re-emergence of misogynistic or a misogynistic culture in the Philippines. Misogynistic remarks and verbal attacks laced with sexism are hurled against women leaders and public servants. Women leaders are often stereotyped as incapable of holding significant public positions and are morally discredited. Many of them face and continually experience public humiliation, vilification, and political harassment and repression. All these stifle legitimate dissent, silence criticisms, and may ultimately discourage women from being active in politics. While the Philippines has a rather robust set of laws aimed at addressing gender stereotyping and gender-based violence, access to justice remains a major issue. Data from 2017 show that only 1/3 of women who experienced physical or sexual violence sought help to stop the violence. However, 41% of the women never told anyone. This can be attributed to one or more of these factors: lack of confidence in state duty bearers, lack of awareness on the available services and existing protective mechanisms, fear of personal safety, ruining family reputation, political bias, reprisal from public officials, and cultural and social expectations. Gender sensitivity and education on gender equality and women's human rights remain to be the most important starting points in transforming prevailing discriminatory gender norms. Towards the end of 2020, news about a learning module asking students to choose which toys are for boys and which toys are the ones for girls went viral after a student's answer that all toys are for both boys and girls. Modules like this are starting points of gender stereotyping and discrimination. Apart from the Philippine state obligation under CEDAW, our own Magna Carta of Women requires the revision of gender stereotypes and images in educational materials and curricula. It likewise mandates the use of gender-sensitive language and capacity building on gender and development and human rights for teachers and all personnel in the education sector. However, these obligations or these state obligations, laws, policies, and programs cannot remain as nicely written words. Implementation is still key. For our part, the Commission has instituted programs that seek to protect the rights of women and promote gender equality. We have adopted protocols in investigating human rights violations against women and persons with diverse SOGI and continue to provide legal and financial assistance, no matter how limited, to victims of these violations. We periodically monitor the situation of women and other vulnerable groups. Recently, we institutionalized the GBV Observatory that serves as a data hub for GBV cases and created the GBV Reporting Portal to address gaps in referral pathways for women during the pandemic. We have also mainstreamed empowerment of women in our programs, such as the peer monitoring project by women with disabilities and organizing their collective to enable them to safeguard their rights in the community. As Gender Ombud, the Commission regularly issues statements and advisories regarding pressing gender issues, ranging from positions on legislative proposals, calling attention on misogynist remarks, to addressing women's socio-economic needs and ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health, commodities, and services in this health crisis. The Commission will not accept the notion that gender discriminatory norms are ingrained in the Filipino culture. Culture is not static, and the challenge to change this is a long struggle. As such, I wish to highlight the importance of gender-sensitive public communication, information, and education in various forms and platforms as an important step or an important first step towards gender socialization to promote and protect gender equality and women's human rights. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your comments and your wisdom. The Philippine Commission on Human Rights is a critical collaborator of the state that acts with autonomy with respect to any public or private power in the name of the common good and in defense of the rights of women. From what you shared with us, I will reemphasize on the importance of gender sensitivity and education on gender equality and women's rights as crucial starting points in transforming prevailing discriminatory gender norms, as well as that state obligations, laws, policies, and programs cannot remain as nicely written words. The implementation is still a key. So unfortunately, we still don't have Dr. Eliana Rebollar Anaños, the Deputy Ombudsman. She hasn't joined us yet. So I'll have to go to our next speaker until she joins us. It is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Mr. Augustine Baimooka, a technical specialist on democratic governance, human rights, and gender equality of the United Nations Development Program. Augustine, thank you for participating in this panel. I'm beyond grateful for that. Harmful gender stereotypes are one of the root causes for discrimination, abuse, and violence against women and children, and can lead to violations of a wide array of human rights. So can you give us some examples of how gender stereotyping affects the enjoyment of human rights? You have a long time experience working for the UNDP, and development is about change, right? Development initiatives are investments in promoting social and economic change, and some of them aim to change values and practices that shape social relations. So how do you intervene in local contexts? How do you identify opportunities for positive steps in support of transforming gender stereotypes?
Thank you very much, Despina. Thank you very much for the introduction, and good evening to you. Here it is already evening. It is actually coming to 9 in the evening. So, and good morning to others. Maybe I will just use my experience through the countries I've been working with, and give examples of some of the issues I've come across, which lead to the abuse of human rights, and the women not enjoying the full array of their rights. Some of the things I've come across involve the FGM. It is a very common practice across the world. And this obviously affects the right to life, reproductive health rights, and others. Then also we have the issues of early marriages, where some communities encourage girls to not to continue with school and they drop out at the earliest opportunity. And then we have issues relating to pregnant girls not being allowed to continue. Then we have issues of the weight of evidence given to women and girls is less than that which is given to men. Women must really go out of their way to provide as much evidence as possible in order to sustain a case. Then we have issues which are also related to life, especially the right to life in terms of honor killings. Some communities still can murder their female relatives because they are suspected of having committed crimes related to honor. All in all, the mainly religious and cultural practices can be attributed to some of those stereotypes which discriminate against women, and women are treated differently just because they are women. So some of the examples of the interventions which I can share with you. Some countries have enacted, in order to come across, to address those issues, have enacted special laws to deal with the women-related cases and the and issues, especially the EVA laws, Elimination of Violence Against Women laws. Then also some countries have established special family and children's courts to handle women-related issues, so that the women's rights are addressed. In some countries, they have established gender desks at police stations and law enforcement places, so that women, the gender-related cases are given priority. And in some jurisdictions, of course, they have, in terms of prosecution, the prosecutors have adopted a victim-centered approach, where the victim is put as the center, and they participate in the case as interested parties. Then another issue which, of course, addresses some of these issues is education. It's long term, but all in all, it might be the best way to transform some of the societies, because once a woman is educated, then they are able to tackle some of these issues even without the help of other men. Then there is also, of course, some countries have adopted an all-inclusive coordinated approach, where the whole of society has been involved in educating the public. Not right to discriminate against women. Women and men have equal rights. Boys and girls should be treated the same way and should be given equal opportunities as per the Agenda 2020. And briefly, that's what I can say, but there are a lot of other interviews to talk to in the question and answer session. Thank you very much, and over to you, Espina.
Thank you, Augustine. I know that our time window is very tight, and thank you for sharing your points. They were very inspiring and encouraging. I really appreciate your valuable contribution to this discussion today. I would like now to introduce to you our next speaker, Ms. Helena Vassal. She's the Vice President of Programs, Prevention and Social Change of the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence here in the US. Arlene, we're extremely happy to have you with us today. Preventing violence means changing our society and its institutions, targeting attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, environments, and policies to eliminate those that contribute to violence and to promote those that stop violence. If I'm not mistaken, for over 25 years, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence has worked to strengthen the capacity of programs responding to domestic violence victims and their families by promoting effective public policy, institutional response, and research and engagement in prevention. What are the key initiatives and special projects of your organization that aim to ultimately prevent violence from occurring?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of this panel and for joining everyone on this very crucial conversation. It's Women's History Month, so I want to acknowledge all the women on the panel and all the male-identified gentlemen who support our work so that we can live a life free of violence, all of us. I also want to acknowledge the women of color who paved the way for me to do this work. I do this work to keep their legacy alive and also for generations ahead. So again, we do this work at NRCDV so that the generations ahead, Black and brown girls, can reach their full potential and live their lives free of violence, bias, and oppression because of our work and because of our collective work, everyone here. Yes, for the last 25 years, I am really proud that NRCDV has focused on enhancing community responses and also to improve the conditions where women and girls live, where they grow, where they learn, where they love, where they worship, just all of the conditions. Our mission is to strengthen and transform efforts to end domestic violence. So all of our work is done through a prevention lens, right? So whether we're doing trainings, whether we're doing resource development or policy initiatives, we're doing them through prevention lens. And towards the end of my presentation, I'll show a couple examples because messaging and language, consistent messaging is important for us. Much of our prevention efforts are guided by the documented strategies and approaches supported by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So the CDC really has invested a lot of resources in developing prevention models to end, to prevent domestic violence, to prevent teen dating violence. So our role as a national organization that receives funding from the CDC is to amplify that message across the country. At NRCDV, when we talk about prevention, we're intentional about breaking down the silos between awareness and prevention. So it's not an or. So it's intentional that we're talking about both. We need enhanced responses, we need awareness efforts, and we need prevention efforts. So that's one of the key things that we do at the National Resource Center. Additionally, we center the voices of marginalized communities. We cannot do prevention work without doing that, without centering the voices of the communities most impacted. So at this point, I'm going to share my presentation with some examples of what that looks like in our work. All right, let me do this. If it gets too challenging, then I'll just share the information. All right, I think we're good. Can you see it? All right, perfect. So really quickly, because of time. Okay, so I want to do the slideshow. Okay, here we go. All right. Play from start. All right, if you're visual, this might be helpful for you because I like to also put visual to words. So again, meeting the moment, this is our prevention work. What are the lessons that we're learning from the multiple pandemics? Advocates, activists, and preventionists across the country, we're being forced, right, to pivot our work, redefining what the collective we looks like. So again, that's a part of our messaging. Strengthening again, to strengthen and transform efforts to end domestic violence. We also work on cultivating an internal culture within our organization that supports equity, that supports dignity, the facing work. We're also doing the work within our organization so that our internal capacity, our internal messaging is in alignment with our external efforts. Prevention is social change. We continue to talk about that. We continue to talk about addressing root causes and the systems that perpetuate violence against women and girls. Racial justice is our work. We continue to talk about that as we talk about our prevention work. It's not enough to be anti. We have to call for action. And we recently had a campaign around no survivor justice without racial justice. So again, racial justice is a part of our prevention initiatives. We also emphasize that gender violence is fueled by systemic oppressions. So messaging is important. This is a visual that was created by one of our state coalitions. We do our work, our prevention work, in collaboration with our funders, with survivors, with state coalitions, with community-based organizations, across disciplines and across sectors. Beloved community, Dr. King introduced this language to us many, many years ago. So as we do our prevention work, we're focusing on beloved communities. This is what we're talking about when we talk about social determinants of health. This is what we're talking about when we talk about conditions for women and girls to thrive. So we're going back to what we've been taught a long time ago. And again, the integration pieces, we're talking about awareness, we're talking about action. So basically, increased knowledge is not enough to prevent violence. We need to increase knowledge and provide tools for engagement, for community engagement. A good example of that is a social media campaign that we're working on now by Black youth, for Black youth. And they're doing the awareness and intervention pieces, messaging, but we're also doing prevention. And they're using storytelling as a tool for social change. So consistent messaging, collaboration, community engagement, those are key components of everything that we do at NRCDV. And where you can find all the information, in addition to the resources that has been developed by the CDC that we continue to expand on and continue to share throughout the country, is at preventipv.org. This is our One Thing campaign. It was developed by a Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Group in consultation with Mathina James Brightful, who's the co-founder of Heal a Woman, Heal a Nation. Our One Thing messaging is easy to use, easy to adapt, easy to say, and everybody becomes a part of the solution. So when we're thinking about prevention, we're thinking about connecting with communities and communities seeing themselves. And we're using language that's digestible and relatable. So if you look to the right, you'll see one thing I want my children to know about is love, race, justice, safety, privilege, equity. We're talking about the social determinants of health. We're talking about the conditions where women and girls live, love, thrive. And we're also talking about beloved community. So as I wrap up, I just want you to know you can find all of our key initiatives and special projects on our website at nrcdv.org. I also encourage you to connect with us, follow us on all social media campaigns. You'll learn more about our initiatives. And then my direct contact information, avassel@nrcdv.org rather. Please connect. I want to continue the conversation. I want to build community, and I want to share learnings on behalf of the generations ahead of us. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you for your passion for these enriching points. You shared with us some examples of initiatives and projects that actually serve people and are very important towards improving community response to domestic violence and ultimately preventing its occurrence. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker, Ms. Salsa Marie de Silva, the founder and CEO of the Raddat Foundation in India. Welcome, Elsa. I'm extremely happy to have you on this panel. Could you share with us how do you advocate in your organization to create awareness on abuse and sexual harassment against women in India and get women to actually break their silence and to report their personal experiences? Let's dive more into your social project called Safe City. The floor is yours, Elsa.
Thank you, Despina, and thank you, IPA, for having me join this interesting discussion and share my work. You know, sexual and gender-based violence is a global pandemic, which impacts on an average 1 in 3 women around the world. Unfortunately, this kind of violence is taboo, and there is a culture of silence around it, making it difficult for women and girls to speak up. So the topic of today's conversation is very important because we need more safe spaces to talk about uncomfortable subjects. I would like to show you some of the slides on how we are challenging the status quo through Safe City. So this is something that we started in December 2012 as an immediate response to the gang rape of a young woman on a bus in Delhi. It encourages anonymous reporting of sexual and gender-based violence. And what I have learned in the last 8 years is that there is a poor understanding of what constitutes the spectrum of sexual violence or how it is intentionally targeted towards a particular gender. And through breaking it down into categories ranging from non-verbal forms like staring, ogling, taking pictures, indecent gestures, to the verbal forms of it, commenting, catcalls, sexual invites, and the physical forms of it. And these are only some of it: stalking, touching, groping, sexual assault and rape. we're actually providing a vocabulary to one's experience. Unfortunately, many of these violations occur on a daily basis and has become so normalized that we believe that it is part of our daily routine and that we should accept it without a fuss. Instead, we change our behavior, we adjust our routines, we restrict our mobility, we self-censor and limit our own opportunities to achieve our potential. This, of course, promotes a culture of insecurity, which further perpetuates harmful norms that limit women and girls. Do not go out late, do not wear short clothes. Spaces are unsafe, so stay at home. Do not speak up, lest you bring shame to yourself or your family. However, with Safe City, we are trying to break that silence and bridge the data gap that exists. The official statistics do not reflect the true nature and size of the problem. And by documenting their story anonymously, it is the first step in acknowledging the incident happened and making it visible. Each story is plotted on the map and visualized with others as hotspots. This data can be analyzed further to understand location-based trends, patterns, and trends of the crime happening by category, time of day, and day of week. And you can read these reports and build your own situational awareness or use the data to commence dialogue with your community on what could be the solutions. Or you can also demand accountability from service providers like the municipality or the police or campus administration. And thus far, we have close to 19,000 stories, not only from India, but also from several other countries like Kenya, Malaysia, Nigeria, Cameroon. And we've used it to engage over 750,000 people to make their communities safer. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Your insights are so enriching and inspiring. As you very well stressed, we need more safe spaces to talk about uncomfortable subjects. And I would say we need more projects like City, which will break the silence and bridge the data gap that exists. Because yes, indeed, the official statistics do not reflect the true nature and size of the problem. Our next speaker is Dr. Helena Ann Mitchell, a mental health researcher and consultant. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for joining us. I'm very well aware that you have an extensive research experience in Guyana. So I have a question for you based on that. Gender identities and gender relations are critical aspects of culture because they shape the way daily life is lived in the family, but also in the wider community and the workplace. Expectations about attributes and behaviors appropriate to women or men and about the relations between women and men sometimes are shaped by culture. So if violence is culture, is it unquestioned? How do we challenge gender stereotypes and respective roles and foster gender equity and equality? What are the key points associated with challenging the gender stereotypes?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Despina. It's good evening, everyone. As you notice, it's nighttime here. I started in sunlight, and I notice it's gradually getting darker. I've had to put the light on. Yes, so thank you, everyone, and thank you again for asking me and inviting me to attend this webinar for a topic I think that's caused great concern for several years. Well, actually, for generations, I should say. I think it's good we're having this positive conversation, as I'm aware that gender stereotyping has prevailed more than expected. Women perform significant roles, yet they have been ignored, defiled, abused, and persecuted. And as the speaker just said, I've done quite a bit of research in Guyana, originated in Guyana. And I was shocked and horrified when I went there, when I worked with a group of women to find out that some of the issues that I remembered as a child is still continuing. I felt that in challenging gender stereotypes, it's important to remember that gender stereotyping and gender role formation are sociocultural and relational constructs which develop in institutional networks, social interaction, and relationships, especially in the family. And that is particularly evident in the Guyanese family. And I thought that we could actually start with the home when the children are obviously very young, and with their parents. And of course, for me, one way of dealing with this is looking at a program of education that should start in those very early years, that really encouraging children to avoid what I call gender policing. For example, avoid saying that's for boys and that's for girls, particularly toys, books, films, movies, etc. And consider more on other aspects that they could take on board as boys, caring roles, cooking, and so forth. And for girls, avoid girls to just concentrate on beauty, which is what I saw in Guyana. Imagination, you do the cleaning and the caring, and adopting a very passive role, and talking more about stories of princesses and so forth. They also absorb messages, as we well know, from the media and society as to what is the right way to be a boy and a girl. And I'm asking for that to be avoided, to actually spend time with them, encourage children to think for themselves and to start making choices from an early age with the help and support of parents. However, this change in attitudes and behavior may only occur in a small percentage of families, and that's what I observe. So some families are trying to take on more of a role where fathers can play a part in developing their children. But of course, I feel they need partnership working in order to ensure they start addressing these challenges. Now, by partnership working, I actually saw one of the things that we could do, and this is from my research hat, because I'm an action researcher, is co-production of resources. I noticed in Guyana, they love to tell stories, and they also like to do art, and they like to portray their feelings on paper. So fathers and mothers could actually sit down with their kids and portray some of their feelings, so the kids start to learn at a very early age. What is it? What are the antagonisms? What are the issues in the family? It has to start there. And also with the extended family, because Guyana still believes in an extended family. The other area I think is important is fostering gender equity and equality. As I said, women often face problems with this in the households. For me, a lot of the issues with this is in the households. And women still tend to fall usually as the unpaid housework, which is not valued. And also men are still not willing to be participants in the redistribution of power between the genders in the household. They still tend to take on this masculine persona. That's not my work, that's for you, you know, that's the wife's role. And this unequal power dynamics between men and women can cause the immense dissatisfaction, leading to anger and resentment for both groups. I found a very interesting study here in Australia, looking at Australian attitudes to gender roles, because I've spent quite a bit of time in Australia. And while they're becoming more progressive, these views are not translating into real change in the home and workplace, according to the latest release of this Hilda survey, it was called. And this was done in 2019. So this is quite recent. So what I'm going to say to you, we need more research. I know I've started the research in Guyana, but we need more research to actually look at what are these issues and how can we actually address them. So to summarize, I feel for me that the main issue here is education in the home. I'm an educationalist. I'm a nurse educationalist by background, and I think it needs to start in the home. And the next issue for me is more detail and specific research. And I think using action research, participatory action research, is collaborative research, and it will actually get us to give these groups, men and women, the voice to talk about their experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for your rich comments and sharing your experience on this topic. I need to reemphasize what you said about the role of education. It needs to start at a very early age in order to avoid making choices like what is the right way to be a girl or a boy, in general, avoid gender roles. Thank you for that again. Thank you for sharing your experience. And now it is time to share with you a very touching story, a human voice from a young woman who has experienced extreme trauma, violence, mental and physical abuse by her former spouse. Her name is Meredith Hatton. She's a single mother of a young boy and has been a flight attendant for 24 years. And Meredith, thank you for being here and for finding the actual courage to share your story and raise your voice. For so long, society has left the topic of gender-based violence, and in your case of domestic violence and sexual exploitation, untouched, to the point that it seemed taboo. So I will pose the question of why. Why do you think this topic is so uncomfortable or even awkward for most people? Why does it seem like people go out of their way to avoid such conversations?
Thank you, Despina. Thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to be here and to have your attention. Hopefully, by sharing my story, perhaps I can answer that question. I do need to point out that the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when he or she decides to leave the abuse. That is when the abuser realizes that he no longer has control of his victim. And that is when he or she makes knee-jerk reactions, causing undeniable harm. There's so much to it. There's so many facets to that, but perhaps once I share my story, maybe you'll understand, and perhaps I can understand a little bit more hearing from you. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer. But I will say, because I knew nothing about intimate partner violence, I did not realize that my abuser displayed several warning signs before we got married. So once we were married, he rearranged my retirement contributions without my permission, made important financial decisions about our home without consulting me. He quit his job without informing me, keeping it a secret for almost a month. He opened all of my mail, laughed at me at my expense, called our dogs names just to get a reaction out of me. In time, I felt like a hostage tied to a chair while he did things behind my back with zero consideration of my feelings. He started every conversation with, "Let me help you understand." And that's just it. He didn't outright call me stupid, but he made me feel stupid about everything. "Let me help you understand" was said to me every time he felt the need to put me in my place. He repeatedly harassed me for sex in ways that didn't make it feel like it was loving or gentle, reciprocated or respectful. I cried every time he rolled on top of me. I wanted to vomit anytime he touched me. I stopped breastfeeding earlier than I had intended so I could begin taking antidepressants. But by the time our child was a year old, my sadness didn't dissipate. I had no idea who I was. It was supposed to be the happiest time in my life, a new husband, a baby, a beautiful home, yet I wasn't happy at all. If I may quote my abuser, "Let me help you understand. I thought this was all my fault. I was failing our marriage. Every action I made or lack thereof was a disappointment to my husband." I cried often. I started cursing at him like a rabid animal at times in frustration. I believed I wasn't conforming to married life well, so my abuser took me to a few therapists to fix me. And so it happened after days, weeks, months, and years of me feeling worthless and disrespected, the physical violence began. He was frustrated with me. The first time he hit me, I was in shock. I wore long sleeves to hide my bruise. I wanted to pretend it never happened, but from that point on, I was chased around the house, thrown into the toilet, kicked in the stomach, and had my arms twisted and wrapped around my own back. He took pictures of me while I was naked and asleep without my permission, without me knowing it. I found those photos on accident while I was cleaning out our closet. So when I found out he was having an affair, it didn't surprise me. One of our couples therapists suggested an open marriage. I would be granting him permission to seek intimacy outside of our union. I was not able to give him what he needed physically. I was failing marriage miserably, but I didn't know how or why. In hindsight, I feel like it was 2 against 1 convincing me this was the best solution. And even though it didn't surprise me, I didn't think he'd actually do it either. He was having an affair with a woman and her friend, both employees of the local police department. I found out in the most painful way possible. They were having their affair in my home, in my bed, while our toddler was asleep in the next room. To make matters worse, their affair also included married police officers who were men. It was a covert group sex thing within the police department that spilled into the boundaries of my home. It went on for months without me knowing. I then contacted my abuser's best friend and his mother, asking them to guide him onto a path that would end the violence and the affairs. I told them both that the next time he hurt me, I was probably going to end up in the hospital. Shortly after my conversation with those closest to him, he started yelling at me one night while hovering over me. I told him to go away. I knew the angry look in his eye. He was going to hit me. Because I used the back of my left hand to indicate he needed to stop, not come any closer, my wedding ring scratched his chest. He then took my left arm and dragged me out of bed until he found his phone. 911, what's your emergency? He said. My wife is attacking me. When the police arrived, 4 male officers came into our home. I was in shock, angry, and scared. I believe my abuser set me up for this very moment. It didn't make any sense that they would be in my home for this. I asked the officers if they were intimate with my husband and mentioned the women and the police detectives involved. The officers laughed through their no ma'am responses, but I didn't believe them, so I didn't say anything at all. Meanwhile, my abuser was downstairs having pictures taken of the scratch my wedding ring made on his chest and his forearm. Apparently, my ring scratched in there too when he dragged me out of bed. Because of his scratches, and because I was too afraid to speak to the officers in my home, I was arrested for domestic battery that night. I believed once I had a chance to tell my whole story to someone at the police department, it would be okay, and my story would add up to whomever would listen. I'd be able to tell them that I recognized the look in his eye, show them the scar from when he threw me onto the toilet, tell them that I begged for help from his mom and his best friend. But in the police department, nobody came to talk to me. Instead, I had my mugshot taken, my fingerprints recorded. I had to take off my clothes, and while naked, I was told to turn around, face the wall, bend forward, and spread my legs apart. A gloved officer ran her finger in my private areas looking for a weapon or drugs. That was the first and only time I cried. Through tears, I turned my head around to her and quietly said, I thought he was going to hit me again. My court-appointed psychological exam states, the results of this assessment indicate significant pathology and trauma. In conclusion, it is my professional opinion that Meredith Hutton presents with victim pathology, was credible in describing the problems in her relationship, and in my professional opinion, she is in fact a victim of domestic violence and extreme mental cruelty. Despite these findings, I was sentenced to 48 hours of community service, 1 year probation, and had to take a 6-month-long class of domestic violence abuser. Apparently, that is standard punishment for anyone arrested for that crime. Weeks after my sentencing, my abuser grabbed my phone out of my hand. He wanted to see who I was talking to. I had nothing to hide, so I didn't resist. I asked for his in turn. He obliged. I clicked on his social media app in his phone. I began to cry immediately. My abuser was using this particular app for pornography picture and video clip exchanges. His profile picture was of a naked woman. His wallpaper was that of the same woman. He was presenting himself as a female. The pictures were of me. My naked body was all over the internet because my husband was pretending to be a female and used pictures of me to do it. Directly under the naked profile picture of me was a disclaimer. The content of this profile was for the ages of 18 years or older. I left the house that day in tears and shock. I ignored his apologetic phone calls and his text. If he did catch me in a weak moment, I would indicate how embarrassed and ashamed he made me feel. One text said exactly that. I'm so humiliated. I'm so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. I just want to die of embarrassment. I am the mother of your son. How could you do this to me? It was 9 p.m. by the time I finally came home that night. I knew my abuser was home, but I never actually saw him. I had been home for almost 45 minutes when the call came in on my cell phone. Police officers were outside demanding I come to my front door. I opened the door to see 2 officers, and beyond was an ambulance with 2 paramedics waiting for me. One officer said, "Meredith, we are here because we got a phone call from your husband, very worried that you might want to hurt yourself. So can you please tell us if you've swallowed anything that might cause harm to you?" In my confusion, I asked what is going on. Again, they said, "Your husband contacted us because you told your husband you wanted to die. He's very concerned." Okay. I said, no. I told him I wanted to die of humiliation. We all say that when we are embarrassed. Did he tell you what happened this morning? Again, "Meredith, we need to get you into a place where you can be evaluated. You can either go into that ambulance right there willingly or not. Either way, you're going to be seen by a medical profession tonight, okay? Do you understand?" I scanned their badges for their names. Again, I had to ask if they had been intimate with my husband or had been in my home to engage in sexual activity. Of course, they looked at me like I was out of my mind, but that was my reality with my abuser. In frustration, shock, and disbelief, I started to cry. I fell to my knees and begged them to listen to me through my uncontrollable sobbing, but they were not listening to me. With a police officer on either side of me, they picked me up under my arms and lifted me off the grass. They walked me to the ambulance. My knees were weak and my feet were dragging behind. I was strapped onto a gurney in case I'd grab a tool to hurt myself or the paramedics. It was their protocol. I was wheeled into the emergency room and classified as an L2K, meaning a psych patient forced to be there against my will. When the ER doctor arrived, I told him the events of the day, of the week, the month, the years, essentially the exhausting life with my abuser. After running toxicology tests and physical assessments confirming I had no self-inflicted wounds, the doctor came to me, looked me in the eyes and said, "I do not believe you are a threat to yourself, but I do believe you are not safe to go back home with him there and guns in the house." I looked at him feeling so tired and defeated and desperate. And then he said one more thing. "He's already been able to convince the legal system that you inflict violence towards him. He was able to convince someone tonight that you are harm to yourself." And he went on. "Because your husband was able to establish that both scenarios are possible, do you want your mom to believe your death was a self-inflicted gunshot wound or that he had to shoot you in self-defense?" PTSD, knowing there are naked images of me on the internet forever. The idea of co-parenting with my abuser. I will always be, for the rest of my life, domestic violence surviving. That is my uncomfortable conversation that I am very comfortable with sharing with you today. It is my hope that there is a global initiative to make the dynamics of healthy and unhealthy intimate partner relationships and conflict resolution part of the young adult curriculum in school. They need to be taught these life lessons, taking priority among the ranks of healthy diet and exercise in a physical education class. Teaching these young kids what abusive red flags look like. They could save someone like me who never knew what abuse looked like or felt like, or even sounds like. I'm not sure where I'd be today if it wasn't for the ER doctor, but do know one thing for sure. The abuse was getting worse very rapidly. I want to thank you all for your time. It's an honor to have your attention and be in your company. But most important, I need to thank my family and my friends who have helped make my exit from my abuse safe and free from judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. I think we are all speechless. All I have to say is that no matter how uncomfortable the language around the topic may seem, we must get over the barrier that prevents us from having this conversation. We must allow ourselves to learn more about this type of violence in order to find a way to give better aid and help out the people affected by it. I think we must stop looking at people who have experienced violence as victims, vulnerable to violence in a sense, but as survivors who have or will overcome a traumatic experience that does not define them. I'm moving on to our next speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Supark Prongthura. He's the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of Thailand to the UN. Your Excellency, we're extremely privileged to have you with us today. The government of Thailand has attached great importance to mainstream gender perspectives in the national policy, giving priority to the promotion of gender equality, women's role in politics and administration at all levels. I'm aware, for example, that in 2013, yes, if I'm right, Thailand was the first ASEAN country to have signed on to the UN Women Global Campaign Commit to End Violence Against Women. What are the national action plans and strategies in Thailand that foster a culture of gender equality, as well as transform beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors that condone violence against women and girls?
Thank you. Thank you very much, a distinguished panelist, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Well, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to join all of you today in this webinar organized by the International Presentation Association. After listening to the discussions and the many heartfelt stories, by our distinguished panelists, I am delighted that, to learn of the progress we have made thus far in putting an end to all forms of violence, as well as promoting the advancement of women and girls. But at the same time, of course, I have also realized that we still need a more concerted efforts in many areas to bridge remaining gaps in gender equality, ending violence against women and girls, and then, on our part towards sustainable development goals. We can never be complacent. Indeed, it has become more important than ever before, especially as we seek to build back better, from the adverse impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, that put women's and girls at even more risk. Turning to the question posed by Madam Moderator, I wish to reiterate Thailand's commitment to achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls in all dimensions. Well, firstly, our 2017 Constitution guarantees equality of all persons and prohibits discrimination on various grounds, especially gender discrimination. Accordingly, the Royal Thai government has taken measures to ensure that women and girls enjoy their rights and liberties on the same basis as others within the society. Its implementation is also supported by, among others, the 2015 Gender Equality Act and mechanisms such as the Committee on Consideration of Unfair Gender Discrimination and Treatment. Secondly, the Constitution also calls for gender responsive budgeting. So each year, the annual budgeting expenditure acts is developed, by taking into account the different needs based on gender, age, conditions of persons to ensure fairness and inclusiveness. Thirdly, Thailand attaches great importance to women's economic empowerment as a part of our continued efforts in promoting gender equality, as well as inclusive and sustainable development. In 2007, for example, the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises Promotion supported the establishment of the Thai Women SME Association that works tirelessly to promote women entrepreneurship through building networks of women entrepreneurs, developing capacity and providing consultancy services, as well as financial assistance to women. Moreover, I am pleased to share with you that Thailand is among leading countries where women enjoy a high percentage of leadership positions in the business sector. In Thailand, for example, women make up 24% of the chief executive officers and 43% of the chief financial officers. This ratio is considered higher than the global average. Having said that, we also realize that more needs to be done to promote women's participation in politics and public administration. For example, in 2019 general elections, 81 women were elected out of the total of 501 seats in the House of Representatives. This is still too little. So the Royal Thai government is fully committed to nurturing and advancing women's participation in politics and public administration, especially through awareness raising, capacity building, and capacity building program. And finally, recognizing that stereotypes usually begin at an early age. Thailand has sought to transform certain gender generalization that might exist in academic settings. This includes revising school textbooks with potential gender stereotypical languages. We also amplify our efforts in this regard at the regional level by coordinating with other countries within the ASEAN family in 2019 to organize a regional meeting on the elimination of gender stereotypes and sexist languages in education materials in primary and secondary levels. Apart from school materials, we have also placed focus on both traditional and social media platforms, as we believe that they can play key roles in shaping the right attitudes on gender equality. Over the years, ma'am, we have worked closely with young influencers who could be a source of inspiration to others to help deconstruct gender stereotypes and champion gender equality, ending violence against women and girls among the new generations. I would like to end my comments here by saying that together we can help make the uncomfortable conversation comfortable. With concerted and continued efforts, we can transform gender stereotypes. Let me reaffirm Thailand's strong determination to push forward gender equality, ending violence against women and girls, and the empowerment of women and girls in our quest towards achieving an inclusive and sustainable development. Once again, thank you very much for organizing this very valuable event and for your kind attention to my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for sharing these reaching and inspiring points. We appreciate your valuable contribution to this discussion today. Unfortunately, our Deputy Ombudsman from Peru cannot join our meeting. I think I can give her some 5 minutes more to wait, if she will be able to join. So I will now open the floor to questions. I see in the chat box, there's plenty of comments for our speakers. Until we have a question, I would like to, since we still have time for a brief comment to wrap up this conversation. UN Women data reveals women's leadership is far from equal and under threat by the pandemic. Only 3 countries globally have 50% or more women in parliament. Current projections actually show that the gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. So I would like to ask our distinguished speakers if they can share with us a 2 or 3 minute statement or comment on this, following also the CSW 65 priority theme on women's full and effective participation in decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence for achieving gender equality. I would start with Commissioner Gomez-Dampit. Would you like to share with us a brief comment on this one? You are muted. Can we have Ambassador Matthias Your Excellency? No. Then Ambassador Prongthura, would you like to share with us a brief comment?
Thank you, ma'am. I have mentioned already in my statement, for Thailand, in the business sector, we have reached it's still low, but we have reached like 24% of women in the chief executive officer's position, and then almost 50% in terms of chief financial officer's position within our business sector. But public in the politics and public administration realm, it's still low, particularly in politics. 81 women were elected out of 500 seats, the last elections. But that it's changing fast because the government is fully committed to nurturing and advancing, women's participation in politics and public administration. And then we are coming up with campaigns to help raise awareness and actually transforming gender stereotyping, and then actually with the message that women belongs in politics and public administration at the highest level. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Do we have Ambassador Matthias? I guess Commissioner Gomez-Dumpit has encountered an issue with her sound. Is that right, Commissioner? I'm really sorry to hear that. Dr. Mitchell, would you like to share a very brief comment, because we have also the Deputy Ombudsman waiting to share her experience with us. So a brief comment on my question. Dr. Mitchell, are you there?
Oh yes, I'm here, Despina. Can you just remind me again of the question? Sorry. I missed it.
Yeah, to comment on the fact that there is data that reveals women's leadership is far from equal. And actually, they show that gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. So I would like a brief comment on that, given that only 3 countries globally have 50% women in parliament.
Yeah, well, I can comment in the UK, and particularly in the, I will look at the higher educational institutions, of which actually, I can't tell you the exact percentage, but still we have a very low percentage of women who are actually professors or even vice chancellors. Males still predominate in that role. I can look at nursing, of which I'm, as you said, I'm a nurse educator. And I can say that in the chief exec positions within our trust, we still have a significant lower number of women that achieve those roles. So I think it prevails throughout the Western world, that many women just do not get to that position. I can also speak about the Black and minority ethnic women. If you look at their profiles, many of them, I think it's something like only 3% ever become a professor within this country. So it prevails, is what I'm going to say to you. And maybe the 100 and something years is a true reflection, because I think it's a significant reduction in women achieving equality in our societies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. Arlene?
Yes, I want to build on what Dr. Mitchell just mentioned, and even pivot to our nonprofit world and our movement to end gender-based violence, where the leadership of women of color is still not where it should be. So as we're examining the business sector and women not being where we would like women to be as far as living wages, equal pay, leadership positions, I think we also are looking at our violence against women movement and the leadership of women of color being missing in those spaces, when the communities that are most impacted by violence and other intersecting issues within the United States are really focused on women of color and minorities. Yeah.
Thank you, Arlene. And Salsa? Very quickly. I know it's an extensive question and I ask for a brief answer.
I think it takes intention and investment. So there's no excuse that we are still having this conversation. If men can make space for us, they can do it. So it's not that it can't be done. So I say it's an intention and then investment.
Thank you, Elsa. Augustine, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, just to add, I think one of the issues, I was in another webinar earlier, and one of the issues is that access to campaign financing is also a bottleneck for women who want to join politics, because they don't have access to resources, the same resources as men have. So they are disadvantaged from the word go. And even the affirmative action may not be as helpful, because if the processes are not as participative, as free and fair, and credible, still there are still a number of challenges which women have to overcome in order to be in positions of political authority. Over to you.
Thank you, Augustine. And Ambassador Matthias, are you there? Meredith, then?
I'm nodding my head in agreement with several comments. Education is super important. And if you don't know what love looks like and you don't know what love feels like, then you are susceptible to, as far as women in leadership, I think we need to be really strong role models. And when women take leadership, it's unfair that we are labeled in derogatory terms when we are aggressive and when we have a voice and we want to practice leadership. Women tend to be labeled a certain way, whereas men are considered powerful and mighty, whereas women are considered something different. And I think that's a shame, and I think it's unfortunate, and I think we need to spend more time and energy recognizing our strengths instead of our weaknesses. And it's a shame that we're not teaching women how to be stronger through our voice and using our voice as a better tool in an early age.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you so much.
We're considered a derogatory term when we're aggressive, and that's a shame.
Mr. Ambassador, would you like?
Hi, I'm sorry. I was on another call and my colleague just told me that you called me. Can you please repeat the question, as I'm not...
It's the question about following our CSW 65 priority theme for this year, and the fact that we have some UN women data that reveals women's leadership is far from equal. Current projections show that gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. So I would like a brief statement on this.
Well, I mean, like I said in my introduction, Portugal fully endorses the need to tackle this issue. What I can tell you is that we are now currently under our 5th national plan for gender equality and citizenship and non-discrimination. And I mean, we have this national strategy for equality and non-discrimination from 2018 to 2030. And this encompasses 3 action plans that tackle global strategy on gender equality, the prevention, the combat against violence against women and girls, and action plans against discrimination. What I can tell you is that, I mean, even in our parliament, 35% of our parliamentarians are women, 82 in total. Of course, our main objective is to reach this gender priority, both at the ministerial level and also the new government. It has several top positions held by women. So this shouldn't come as a surprise. And so I wanted to try to be a little more specific on the plan that I just mentioned, but I don't have the elements here at hand. But
Don't worry,
yeah, I think you get the gist of the information. I mean,
yeah, we don't have the time anyway. Dr. Revoyar has joined us, and I think we need to offer her the floor. Thank you, Mr.
Of course, it was a pleasure to join you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And now I would like to introduce to you very quickly Dr. Eliana Revoyar Añaños. She's the deputy ombudsman for the rights of women of the Peruvian Ombudsman Office. It is a true honor to have you with us as a speaker, Dr. Revoyar. Even with this delay, gender-based violence is a significant problem in Peru. According to a recent report of 2020 by your office, by the Ombudsman Office, more than 5,000 women and girls have been reported missing in Peru. And you have actually warned about the connection between the disappearances and other serious crimes of violence against women, such as the significant increase in cases of domestic violence, rape, and child sexual abuse during the COVID-19 pandemic. So how do you urge the government to step up measures to address all forms of gender-based violence and
Muchas gracias, Despina.
Thank you, Despina, for your invitation and for the opportunity that you're giving me to share the experience that we have in the Ombudsman Office in Peru, where there is a specific office for women and girls' rights. Last year, we have followed up these missing women, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, it is true that we have seen an increase in cases of domestic violence. There is a system that is working at the moment, which is not efficient enough because it doesn't allow us to distinguish if these women have disappeared because they have been kidnapped by third parties from women that have disappeared due to rape or domestic violence and they have fled from home. This is the great question that we haven't answered yet. The report that you mentioned has led to a search tool that we are using, but and in the Ombudsman Office we have worked on 16 reports on the monitoring of this aspect, and we have also followed up the topic of gender discrimination as well as stereotyping. So when we received the invitation of speak here about the ombudsman role, the ombudsman or the ombudswoman should be a role that needs to speak up in behalf of the population. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves which is the better way to fight and to limit the effects of stereotyping, of gender-based violence, which is very diversified in our country, how roles are allocated in the social environment. And the conclusions is that we have put in place some measures, but they are insufficient. We need to tackle the root causes of this problem. So one first aspect that we find it is fundamental and that needs to be introduced in Peru is education as the main way in which we can achieve change. We all know that these categories, these stereotypes are learn from an early age. So we need to retrain our brains to have another point of view, another way to approach relationships. And this starts at home. And then we need to tackle the issue in more institutional and social spaces. In Peru, there are several initiatives concentrated in change the contents and the curricula of basic of primary studies, the primary studies curricula, in which we have tried that the focus on girls and boys is different, is more gender equal. But you know that public policies are challenged very often by very conservative sectors that pretend or that defend that the education is basic for basic value creation, and therefore is the right of the family to choose a certain private school to have their children raised in these conservative values. So we have tackled the issue also through education programs for male adults, so that they can develop a different idea of their own masculine role. How this role, the male role that is predominant in society, is very harmful, but not just for women, but for society in general. So the key is to question everything, and this questioning has to come also from the side of men. They need to learn to question their privileges just because they are men, and try to deconstruct it, because these stereotypes are harming themselves as well. They need to be strong, they need to be challenging, they need to be fighting all the time, and this is harmful for them as well. So gender equality in Peru is going to be very positive for everybody, not just for women. And we also believe that it is very important to make some efforts to empower women and to make them autonomous, to be self-sustained, to be able to have their own work. And this needs a common work in the whole of society. Everyone has to commit, individuals, men and women, the state, the associations of the civil society. It has to be a cross-sectional topic, and that's why we think that we need to use such life stories as the one we were so privileged to listen to today, as a challenge to the perception, the stereotyped perception that society has from women. And that's why we hope that the new technologies as well as the social media can help us to create a fluid communication and assertive communication against gender stereotypes that can remove the flow of information and the flow of communication and orientate it towards the challenges that we are facing, like male reserved career paths. And I think it is very important to stress the urgency of the different jobs, care jobs, which were reserved for women due to stereotyping. And we need to distribute all the care tasks all across the board. And this has to be tackled also from the juridical as well as from the political level. We know that care professions and health professions are very important, and we could recognize it especially during the COVID pandemic. but it's not a female responsibility. It has to be assumed equally by men and women, and that's why states need to allocate financial resources and put policies in place to guarantee that care is provided by both genders and carried on the shoulders of both genders. Finally, I would like to point out the fact that Latin American countries have a myriad of different cultures with different constructs of what is the role of male, what is the role of women, and we have very different stereotypes in the different Latin American countries. And that's why if we want to have an important, a fundamental change, we need to use an intercultural approach that allows us to identify which is the stereotype structure in each country and tackle it. And therefore, we need to listen to the voices of women in place, on the ground, in the countries, so that we can put in place the measures, the educational measures and the political measures that really answer to the actual situation in each country. It is a great challenge, we know, but we need to empower local women to change the society in place. And this is the idea, and this is the point of view of the Ombudsman Office in Peru. We need urgent solutions and urgent answers on the ground. We need to start working now, today.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for sharing these points and in such a great detail. I think people need to perceive and feel the Ombudsman Office of any country as an institution not only close to, but also deeply committed to solving their problems, not only for their own sake, but for the sake of future generations as well. I have to apologize. We don't have time to address any questions from the chat box. Please use the NGO CSW virtual platform to continue this conversation outside of Zoom meeting. Wrapping up, I think we heard here today so many important and enriching viewpoints, a common inspiring language, I would say, regarding pathways of changing gender stereotypes and norms. Women of the world want and deserve an equal future free from stigma, stereotypes, and violence. Violence against women and girls is pervasive, but it's not inevitable unless we stay silent. So given that my organization's specific UN advocacy focus until 2022 is the elimination of violence against women and children, I will borrow the wording from our newly designed logos: share your story, stop silence, raise your voice, and violence. Thank you all so much for participating in this conversation. A special thank you to each one of our speakers, coming from countries across the globe: Portugal, the Philippines, Peru, Tanzania, the US, India, Thailand, and the UK. It has been an honor to have you all with us today. We're extremely, extremely grateful for your comments and input that all of you shared with us. It has been a very rich and informative discussion. Have a good morning, evening, night, depending on where you're connecting from. Thanks so much. Thank you for participating.